Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for taking the time to be with us today and welcome to the In-House Counsel Forum program. This is our 8th webinar in the series. My name is Abhishek Dadu and I'm a partner in Khaitan's corporate M&A practice group. I would like to extend a warm welcome to every one of you, whether you are in our audience in India or around the world. The In-House Counsel Forum program is designed to provide training and education in legal operations, management, and substantive law relevant to general counsels and their in-house counsel teams, as well as a discussion forum on contemporary issues relevant to the in-house community in India. Our subject today is corporate governance. On the slide that will appear before you is our agenda for today. In summary, we will have an expert panel discussion followed by a Q&A with the audience. We have already received several audience questions, and if you do have questions, please submit them using the facility provided in the webinar portal. If we cannot cover all the questions during the webinar, we will respond offline by email after the webinar ends. A very brief introduction on the topic itself before we invite our esteemed panelists today. Corporate governance lies at the very heart of building trust, accountability, and long-term value in today's complex business environment. As companies navigate evolving stakeholder expectations, regulatory scrutiny, and ethical challenges, governance frameworks are being tested like never before. This webinar will explore sensitive and contemporary issues in corporate governance, from board effectiveness and ESG oversight to conflict of interest, executive accountability, and digital era transparency. Through this discussion, we aim to highlight emerging trends, practical challenges, and strategies that boards and leadership teams can adopt to strengthen governance culture and ensure sustainable business integrity in an increasingly dynamic landscape. With that, I'd like to introduce our panel. Our panel today consists of highly regarded and accomplished individuals in the field of corporate governance. Their detailed credentials have already been shared over email, and I'm sure that you've all gone through them. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking of each. But suffice to say that they are all experts in this subject matter and well qualified to express their views on these issues. With that, I'd like to welcome Arpinder Singh, India and Emerging Market Leader, Forensic and Integrity Services at EY, Jamil Khatri, co-founder and CEO of Unicus Consultech, and Nitin Sethi, CEO at Aeon Consulting. Welcome everyone, and thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. With that, let us jump into the questions. For the first one, I'd like to invite Arpinder. Arpinder, based on your experience, what do you say are the three most sensitive issues in corporate governance in India today?
I would say thanks for that first, Abhishek, and thanks for the invitation to be here. And good afternoon to everybody. I think for me, the number one thing has been the disruption since COVID. As a corporate governance practitioner, prior to COVID, it was business as usual, to be very honest. I think COVID, what it did was it caused a lot of disruption by first all the problems, some of the controls which weakened at organizations because of the fact that it became imperative to sustain your business. And those caught up with most companies 1.5, 2 years later. The second big area was the adoption of technology and AI and digital. I think it started really with COVID, right? Everybody started doing virtual audits and virtual this. And I think the embracement of technology made everything really, everybody adopt a digital version of documents which used to be fairly manual earlier. And I think what happened is that changed our lives as corporate governance practitioners because we had a different way of doing our work and there were different sort of documents we had to deal with. What did this lead to then? What it led to is that once COVID eased off and we came back into business as usual, some of the legacy issues started surfacing. So I think the biggest issues boards and companies faced was this embracement of technology. Now, and second is this changed post-COVID. What did it lead to? First is cyber issues. So everybody had now embraced technology, but without many controls. So everybody, I think the first big thing corporates got hit with was cyber and digital issues. And that was something new, right? The number of ransomware attacks, number of cyber incidents, most companies were not really that comfortable in dealing with. That was one issue. The second is transparency of information, which was actually good in the long run, right? Earlier, people had manual records. You could create records. I'm not saying this in a bad manner. Jamil's the auditor. He'll come in. Nitin is there. But the fact is, it's very difficult to hide anything, right? So companies have to get used to that because everything has an audit trail. Everything has a digital footprint. Every email anybody writes is open for disclosure. So that is again a new thing which boards and companies have got to get used to because that is out there. So I think that's the second thing which companies have to get used to is the fact that everything now is present. Everything is can be previewed by auditors or corporate governance practitioners or stakeholders. So this is the environment which caused huge disruption. On top of that, I think we had a lot of Gen Zs. So, COVID changed everybody's way of thinking. It became that life is important. So it brought in this whole work-life balance thing, which is also super important and good. But what it led to is, I feel, a lot of non-tolerance towards anything which is not good. So if a youngster or even a middle range practitioner is working, I think people have become non-tolerant to bad behavior, bad practices at corporates. So I think that led to a huge increase in whistleblower complaints, whether it was ethical issues around financial statement issues or conduct issues. It could be both. And I think today companies are grappling with the number of whistleblower complaints, number of conduct issues which are coming to their. And now with everything being digital, as I mentioned, even whistleblowing is tracked, right? So auditors will come and ask you, how many complaints have you got? Please disclose it to us. And I think that's the biggest challenge companies are facing is they don't know how to deal with all these complaints. They don't know how to deal with auditors who today you cannot have a coffee conversation with and resolve your issues. I mean, Jamil and I have both been auditors. I mean, those days, you sat with the CFO, he'll have a chat with you and say, you trust me, I trust you, and you kind of move on. But that doesn't happen today. Today, everything has to be audit-based, delivery-based. So that's a new version of an auditor-company conflict, which I don't think any company has faced, which they faced in the last 1 or 2 years. And I would say third thing, you asked three things, is the whole regulator. I think you've got a super active regulator. So you take SEBI, for instance, you have SEBI LODR requirements, which puts a lot of pressure. Today, my auditors, and I'm sure other big four auditors, are always keeping a timeline. They all have charts on their tables which say, if there's a whistleblower complaint, you have 24 hours to do this. You have 7 days to do this. You have 30 days to do this. So everything has become mechanical. That means, and everyone's very conscious that you have to report to SEBI. You have NAFRA requirements, right? So auditors will not take any exposure or risk. And accordingly, with this overactive regulators, which is also good, right? Because it gets you to the right answer. It leads to some bit of panic in the short term. So, and the panic leads to some bit of, this whole bursting of the corporate governance conveyor. So I would say the third thing is a lot of active involvement from the regulators, which has also led to a lot of new laws. And companies are struggling to deal with changes in laws, data privacy, and I'll go through that in later questions. But I think it's been a little bit of conundrum. Personally, as a consultant, I love it, because it leads to a lot of support we can give clients. But I think corporates and boards, I feel for them, there's a lot of change, new laws, regulators, whistleblower, technology, cyber incidents. So I can just go on and on. So it is right now a situation. But
no, that's great insight, Arvinder. Thank you so much. With that, Nitin, let me bring you in and ask a related question. What methods can board use to measure their own effectiveness against their peers? And what best practices can they adopt?
Firstly, thank you, Abhishek. Thank you for having me over for this. It's exciting to be speaking to your audience here. And hopefully, some of this is useful for them as they think along of how they want to engage with their companies, partners, clients, etc. Yeah. Now, on your question, I'm going to pick up from a few things Arpinder said actually, and I agree. I think I think there was change already happening, but I think COVID accelerated that change many-fold. All of that we're seeing now and 5 years from now would have happened anyways. But I think there's a significant acceleration that COVID's done to this, and life genuinely is different. If you're a leader or you're on the board, life genuinely is different, and you're facing different challenges. Whether it's, we did a research which is on a global thing, and it said that four big things impacting companies is around weather, trade, technology, and workforce. And each of those, world has really moved along in a very different direction, from geopolitics to trade to many other things. And and related to that, when you speak of things like board effectiveness, I would say nearly everyone's doing what is the statutory, the regulatory, the most important thing to do. Um, Someone comes in the room, asks you, how do board meetings happen? Is there a degree of independence? Everyone raises hand, fills up a small pen paper survey, and stuff happens. But I think the most important thing here is to know that capabilities, management teams, systems, and processes that are needed in organizations, or capabilities that boards need to solve for problems of tomorrow, not just how they solved for yesterday, are going to be dramatically different. Yeah. To the point again, Arpinder mentioned, AI, crypto, digital, ethics, globalization, risk, including workforce. Like companies are scared of what kind of capabilities do they need for tomorrow, because one, they don't exist, and second, you have to build them literally off the ground. So I would say the more important thing here is that how are boards looking at current set of people on the board, continuous evaluation for that process. What competencies do they need? Are those competencies aligned to strategy of the organization? I think that's an important. Not too many are doing deep work, and some certainly do, and they're getting a good outcome of that particular process. I think the other is, how do you engage with your stakeholders? Your CFO, your chief risk officer, your head of HR, and some of the others. Are you engaging in that process? Because at the end, board takes a bunch of decisions basis the information that actually flows through from them. The idea is not to protect and save that information, but the idea is to get it across in the right manner, because you have a bunch of wise men and women sitting on the other side, and they can counsel you to kind of do the right things. And when they counsel you well, it builds trust, and when there's better trust, there's better credibility, and all of those actually brings in better capital and more sustained performance over a period of time. So I would say that's the other piece to this. And India has a unique challenge that a bunch of our companies are founder led, and founders have extraordinary vision, extraordinary aspirations, but some of them need to come with what is in the domain of governance, what needs to be sometimes counseled, sometimes advised, and managed in that context. So I would say, most companies in India, the clients that we see, do the bare basic minimum stuff well. Yeah, I think very few of them put a lens of what they need out there in the future, and work with that context out there. There are certainly some great examples, but I would say more needs to be. And in fact, even our regulators actually look at it from that perspective to say what needs to happen today so that stuff's happening right. But how many of them are putting out a lens to say what could be challenges of the future, and in that context push for new good practices?
No, thank you, Nitin. That makes perfect sense. Jamin, let me bring you in here. What governance failures most often worsen a corporate crisis, and how can boards prevent them? What are your views on that?
Yeah, no, first of all, again, Abhishek, thank you for having us, and great to talk to this audience. You raised a good point which linked to what Arpinder said and to something what Nitin said earlier. I think one, you have a situation where crisis is inevitable. It will hit you from one way or the other out of the factors that Arpinder described and even others. And then Nitin, as you said, I think whether boards are ready, truly ready beyond what the paper requires them to do, I think is really the question. And therefore the question really is, what happens sometimes in practice, which ends up messing up an already messy situation. So I'll talk about 5 things here. I think first is clearly whether the board has the depth and the expertise to deal with that crisis. Often on paper the board looks very good, but when you get the first set of crises, that's when you realize that the board as a whole does not necessarily have the competence, the expertise, the actual real life skills that are required to deal with the situation. That's reality. The second thing is roles and responsibilities within the board itself. Often whether it's a big startup where you got this nice combination of founder doing what they have to do, investors doing what they have to do, independent directors trying to do what they have to do. Same thing applies in public companies. So often what I see is that roles and responsibilities to respond to a crisis itself often get very blurred. The third thing then what happens is sometimes board members don't even know what they're trying to do. And I'm saying this with in a very, very practical and real manner. Is sometimes, board members think that their thing is to solve the problem themselves actually, rather than govern the solution of the problem. And I tell a lot of my board member friends that it's not your job to find the full solution. You need to make sure that people are taking steps to deal with a crisis rather than you applying your knowledge to solve a crisis. And I think that's again the reality of today. So I think that's one thing that I often reflect on. And whenever we are called in to advise a board on a crisis, I actually look at this framework on competence, responsibilities, and actually being clear about what is expected from the board versus what executive management needs to do in a particular situation. So that's one thing I like to call out. I think the second thing that often can worsen a crisis, to your question, is just stakeholder management. Again, as Arvinder pointed out, auditors are kind of sitting trying to look at things in a particular manner. Different investors have different things to deal with as well. So often where it gets murky is that one is not clear who's maintaining a line of communication with different stakeholders. And again, our advice always have been be very clear on stakeholder management. Invest time. You may be doing great things, and often people do, but unless you're taking your auditors into confidence, your regulators to the extent relevant into confidence, you will not really get to proper stakeholder kind of alignment. The link point then, Abhishek, is on communication. How do you make sure that the cadence and the response to the crisis, if you, for example, need to communicate with your auditor, are you doing that in the right way? If you need to open a line with your regulator, are you doing it on an ongoing basis, and so on? If the employees who need to be communicated with in the case of a crisis, are you doing that in an active manner? So communication becomes very, very critical. I'll kind of end, Abhishek, this one by saying that I also tell boards that every crisis is an opportunity for you to deal with the future. And therefore, often what I also find lacking when people move on, we just finished doing work with somebody, crisis got passed, everybody's happy, everybody pat each other. And I'm now pushing the company to say what happens next. How do we make sure that the next time the same thing doesn't happen? New things will happen, they will happen. This is the real world. But how do you make sure that whatever is the root cause and your response to the root cause is kind of dealt with at that point in time when the issue is live, rather than kind of letting that crisis pass actually. So that's really what my reflection would be, Abhishek.
That's great insight, Jamal. Thank you so much. Nitin, let me bring you back here on another point. With CXOs, MDs, chairmen, we've seen a trend of their pay rising rapidly. How do shareholders and boards ensure that there is performance alignment between pay for senior executives and shareholder interest? And while you're at that, if you could also share your thoughts on what are some of the learnings and lessons that we may have from other parts of the world that we can borrow and implement in India.
Thanks, Abhishek. No, I would say it's a pertinent question in the work that we do. I would say there are a few conversations like this every week, that are now showing up, multiple levels, different kinds of challenges. And I'll give you one that, very recently, founder started off a company, was drawing a particular compensation, let that stuff, kept going over a period of time, raised Series A, Series B, Series C, still stuck at his comp. And now the board's not going to go back and, give you a 5x or a 3x on a comp, leave aside doubling it up. There has to be a process to it now. How do you link it to performance, which could be on top line, or could be on profitability, or valuation, or anything else? Yeah. Or the fact that a lot of CEO pay is linked to equity compensation, We know markets perform different ways, different cycles. Sometimes it's outside, what a company has to do with their own performance. It could be about the industry, it could be larger global macroeconomic stuff. That it's been a challenge, and firstly, talent's not available in the country in the numbers. We may be a country of 1.5 billion people, but for any of us going out and hiring talent, it's a difficult place to be in that context. So you need to kind of keep the talent that's performing well, delivering the agenda that you've built trust with over a period of time, and especially senior leaders in that context. So I would say a couple of things. If you have an active, if you have a listed company, you have an NRC. I think for them to continuously engage with an outside partner who can actually give you independent information, insights on how performance, how CEO pay or CXO pay and trending in the market, in your industry, in your peer group, and things. I think that data, that information, that insight is critical. I would say most companies tend to do that, once in a block of a couple of years. But the best governed companies do it every year. NRC is actively engaged with a partner outside in that context. The other is, I would say, as performance pay comes into place, what kind of incentives, what are measures on incentives, what are you really measuring for, what is short term, what is long term, how do you deliver value through both short term and long term goals and measures that you have, how often do you review them in that context. Then the whole element around equity pay. What are you linking it to? I think gone are those days when companies would throw away equity plans and say, hey, ESOP, just because you spend time in the company, you get X number of units or so and so valuation. It has to be linked to performance, and performance that actually matters to the shareholders more than anybody else in that context. Obviously, when companies go through cycles that are ownership and performance of equity, which is unrelated to their own performance, they could do measures otherwise, and we've seen some of that. But I think those are important ones. I would say the other part to this that not many of them are doing is to put your HR leader in front of the NRC and for him or her to have some independent fair time in terms of advising on quality of goals, quality of standards, how companies are doing, how leaders are doing, and performance and pay in that context. I think the good companies also tend to kind of get the boards involved with a level below that, not in terms of anything else, but getting the leaders, boards to be aware of quality of talent pipeline that sits in the organization, and playing a role in that context. So I would say a combination of those things. We've increasingly seen proxy firms take a view on CEO pay. There have been negative votes advised on multiple fronts over a period of time. So I would say those are the ones, and how have companies tackled that well? I think even if you have a proxy firm raising the voice and saying something, if you've gone through the process, you have a better view of how to respond to it. The challenge is that you get into a rush when this comes in to say, hey, let me look at market data, let me now try and put a view out there of why this is the case, or let me go back to the decision I took. But if you follow the process, follow the cadence, more often than not, you will have logical and right answers to give in that process.
Thanks. On an extension of that, Arvinder, let me extend that from founders, CEOs, and sort of a growth model to succession planning. How should boards approach succession planning to ensure business continuity and investor confidence?
No, thanks for that, Abhishek. But before I answer the specific question, if I can just comment on something Nitin said and Jamil said, and then I'll come to that answer. I was holding my horses, trying to come in. Governance is something I love talking about. So Nitin mentioned about compensation, and I would just say one thing I find interesting more in India than outside India is if you look at the US and European market, and I worked in the US for a few years before coming back to India, and I found compliance was a part of the KPIs, a very strong part. So let's say a business head did very well, his sales grew, his margins were good, his share price increased, he met all those KPIs. But if compliance wasn't there, you didn't get anything. And the lawyers there were very strict at the way they fitted in compliance and corporate governance clauses into ESOPs or terms, etc. And I think that should be an increasing trend within India, would be my advice, because companies go into that quandrum, right? Let's say you have a unfortunate situation with the CEO. He's met his targets, he's a rainmaker, but is a compliance issue. Now, what do you do in that situation? Because your contract does not factor that in as a way you can do a clawback, as we call it, right? Abhishek, you're the lawyer, I'm not. But the fact is that I think there maybe the legal community and the corporate governance committee should look at, because I think it's very important going forward. You can't grow at the cost of compliance, because sometimes it leads to bad behavior. You're just running on a horse, let's say an NBFC or a banking, very easy to get loans, right? Bad quality loans. I mean, I go out there, I live in Gurgaon. I mean, I can get as many loans as you want, but the fact is it good quality loans? Is it following the compliance method? So I think that's one thing I'd like to add to what Nitin said. Everything else I fully buy, I think. Jameel, coming to the crisis thing, I would just like to add one thing, and to his point on knowledge, I fully agree to that, because knowledge is, I think, something all of us have to learn, right? I mean, Jameel and I are both gray-haired now. He's, he looks better than me, but the reality is we all need to upgrade our knowledge, including us. So the fact is even boards need to do that. And the reality is, I don't think they're fully there. I think if it's AI, they need to do courses in AI, or somebody has to come and train them, because otherwise, how can they protect the organization at the board to make the right decision? They're not supposed to do it, but they're supposed to help the company make the decision. So I think that is something where I think there has to be some institute, whether it's Nitin, yours, or somebody else's way, which focuses on really upgrading knowledge, because there's so many independent directors coming in. And I feel it's spotty, at least the interaction I've had with some of them. And I think they're really the end custodians. I've seen some really active chairmen of boards who've done such a super job. And at the same time, I've seen some others which really just follow whatever the promoter says. Whether that's right or wrong, I'm not commenting. But I think that's an area which should be looked at. And coming one last to crisis, I fully agree with the point on remediation. What remediation means is, if you look at deferred prosecution agreements in the US, as Abhishek, you as a lawyer would know, fixing the problem post an incident and fixing the system is as important as dealing with the crisis. And I think that's again an area in India we are very short term, where we've dealt with the crisis and we're like, oh my God, I'm going to sleep tonight and go back to business tomorrow. But that's not the way. You got to remediate and make sure it never happens again. So I think that's super critical. And one crisis we've all kind of not spoken about is, unfortunately, the US crisis, right? With the fact that the pressure, the tariffs, and I think that's something which companies have to deal with going forward, because I don't think you can do long-term planning. You can't work that today the duties are this, and I'm going to make my 2-year plan based on the duties today, because the duties will change 1 month later. At the same time, it's similar to AI, right? I cannot build my plan for 2 years assuming the AI today is this. It's going to change in 3 months. I mean, you've got really smart people coming up with new things every 3 months. So I think that's again crisis, right? Because it's changing every month. People are not used to that. We're used to doing a board meeting once a quarter. How can you do a board meeting once a quarter? Because things are changing every 2 weeks. So I think that's something again for the world to consider. And last, I would say planning in crisis is super critical. I've seen 99% of the companies go bad on planning. They don't involve lawyers to start with. And Abhishek, I don't have any stake with your organization, so I'm not pitching for you, but people don't involve lawyers in time. They involve lawyers when they have a problem. It's a police case, so I need Abhishek. But it should be on day one in a crisis. And I feel that's the basic thing which is lacks. We're just dealing with a World Bank matter on a client, very serious matter. The client's not talking to me. It's a big law firm from the US is talking to me. It's never the client, but that's not the case in India. So I think these are few lessons and things we should pick up. There's some great things we're doing, but there's some things we can learn from the rest of the world. Now, let me come to your specific question. I apologize. I just was very tempted to respond. The main question on succession planning, I like to say it's 2 parts. One is founder and promoter succession planning, and then is senior management succession planning. I think both are important. I'll start with senior management. We just dealt with a case where, first the succession planning, I'll say 5 things I saw go wrong in that case, and it became an unfortunate ethical case at the end of it. So I've gone through it for a month more recently, and it was all around succession. First is the succession was made open a year before by the board, which was silly because it led to so many politics, led to bad behavior with both business heads really trying to do bad things to come out looking better so that the board would decide to select them. I think really bad things, like selling 2 horses that you have a chance, but you should rather look at it on the side and be discreet about it. And I found that very, very surprising in the succession planning because it led to an ethical issue after 1 year. And I actually don't blame those two stakeholders who were pitching for the job because you made it so bad, right? The environment has been so competitive and so aggressive. I mean, we've seen that in the big fours also, right? Jamil and I've gone through it. But when you do it in a not a mature manner, that happens. That's one in succession planning. Second is, I think the committee which is going to be in charge to select the next CEO or the professional CEO, again, they should be well selected. They should understand the industry. They should understand the company. It shouldn't just be a notional committee which has been set up, which will decide who the promoter wants, etc. I think third is at the time when you're doing the succession planning, it should be very clear the type of successor you're getting. And I think the organization should not feel that they are without a leader. So I find succession planning where you take 1 year to decide a CEO and you have an interim CEO is the worst thing you can do for a company because the company implodes. No one makes decisions. It's done very poorly in that sense. So I would say, and I feel succession planning should start 3 years earlier. You know, a CEO must have, like I'll tell you in EY globally, every business leader, all of us are forced to come up with three people who can take our job if something happens. If something would happen, you know, I could have a medical situation. Something could happen, unfortunately. I hope it never happens, but it can. Second is, so I always have to give at the end of every year, who are the three people who can take my job? And it's my responsibility to make sure they're all fully up to it. That's what we do globally. Every business line leader has to do that. So I think succession planning is the responsibility not just of the board or the senior management, it's the responsibility of every individual actually. If I'm a leader, I must do that. And I think that's one great thing we've done it within EY. And I think I would say every company should do that way. We ourselves decide how do we make sure tomorrow, if something goes wrong, there is someone who will take a place and the institution continues. So I will say that on management. Coming to promoters, I've seen two issues. I've seen this whole, I'll just focus a little bit on the son father or the daughter father or the daughter mother, son mother. You know, I'm not being gender specific, but the reality is I've seen so much. I'll give you an example. It happened 2 months back. I was in a board. There was a bribery and corruption issue, unfortunately, allegation, not confirmed. And the fact is, the father comes in and says, oh, this is business as usual. The son comes in who's, you know, Harvard educated and says, this is unacceptable, dad. We cannot have this happening. I need to sack the CEO immediately. Father says, the CEO has worked with me for 30 years. He's the most loyal person in the world. I saw a huge conflict for 1 hour. I was having a coffee and I normally don't put sugar in my coffee. I put about 5 spoons of sugar. I think the guy, my person sitting next to me was saying, sir, aapko kuch ho jayega blood pressure ka. I said, mujhe chodo, the board will have a problem. But the fact is, it's a reality, right? They are thinking differently. One's come from the US, he's thinking world is perfect. One has built his industry hands-on, right, from the bottom up. So you're going to have very two different cultures in the boardroom, and it's going to be a time before one gives to the other or the other gives to the other. So I would say there, again, the board must be really active to make sure it's a smooth succession. It should be very clear what the parent does, what the son does, because it never happens perfectly, is my impression. Third is, I think, like in the old days, I saw companies do where the child actually spent a lot of time for maybe even 10 years learning the business. I think that has really gone down. I think today people are coming in with very good education, but they're going right into senior management position. They're heading a company. Maybe that's not the right decision and something which founders and boards should consider. And I would say generally, if they're like, I've also seen a situation between two sons or two children, where one takes one part of the business, one takes one part, and there's so much conflict there. So then you start having teams and management people who start taking sides. Again, that should be clear. This person looking after sales, this person is going to look after procurement or finance. So I feel transparency, clarity, planning, having mentors and mature people the family trusts and will not just take advantage of is very, very important. So I think there's a whole place today in succession planning for senior mature leaders who can come in and start being conciliatory, mediatory, planning. I actually think, Abhishek, succession planning is super critical for a company to continue to be successful. But I'll pause here.
No, thank you, Arvinder. That's wonderful insight, and I fully resonate. In fact, we've seen instances where listed companies have pursued growth over compliance, and that has resulted in some of the largest phases of degrowth for them because of the implications of messing up on compliance. But I now want to change gears a little, and Jamil, I want to talk to you. I know this is a topic you hold very dear to your heart, and I'm sure Nitin Narpinder, you do too. But what are the most significant risks that company boards face around AI governance in India today? And what steps should they take to mitigate those risks?
Yeah, thank you for that. I think the first thing I'll say is what Arpinder kind of touched upon earlier. See, there are two ways to react to AI. Both are wrong, by the way. One is to say I'm overwhelmed and therefore I will let things settle down before I do something. Or the second thing is really I know everything and therefore I don't need to kind of really think about this in a structured manner. I think the first thing would be for the board. I'm looking this from the lens of the board now, is to just make sure they are clear in terms of what's happening in the world of AI. Of course, it's very difficult even for practitioners to keep up with, but not everybody needs to know everything, right? But you need to know enough about what's happening in the space. The second thing, I think, before one gets to governance of AI, is actually understanding what is the AI plan of the company. It's very easy for CEOs to kind of just talk big and kind of say, we'll adopt AI, we'll do AI and everything. And I've seen this movie just so many times that, and I think that just confuses the executives. I work with a very, very large company in the Middle East. Every department has been given a mandate of implementing AI. And actually the people are just running around trying to figure out what the first use case they can get their hands on. That's absolutely the wrong way of doing it. So for the board to kind of, force management to think very hard to say, listen, if you cut out the clutter, how exactly is AI relevant to our business, both from a risk perspective and an opportunity perspective? What does it really mean? So for the board to understand the AI plan is, I think, from a governance perspective, very important. The third thing then is to understand the context of that plan. What risk does that kind of throw up? And I'll call out three things actually. A few obvious, few not. One is the first risk is how will your business get disrupted by AI? What is it? At Unicus itself, we've disrupted a bunch of things. And I tell my guys, we will get disrupted by AI if we believe that we are above all of this, right? So how will your own business get disrupted? Very important for the board, risk committee, whatever that might be, to have an important lens on that. And then there are some very specific risks to think about. For example, Arpinder mentioned how COVID exposed us to cybersecurity. Just when we all got used to managing our cybersecurity risks, suddenly we have a bunch of new risks coming through use of AI, and we're not prepared. We're doing work with a company in the US right now. Their policy is that ChatGPT will not be used in the organization on company data. And they've got some systems processes to monitor that. But there was a lot of buzz on the floor that people are using ChatGPT. So we actually were called in, and we're working with a very fascinating product company in the Bay Area. And we found that 42% of employees are actually using exposing company data to ChatGPT. Right, and then the question arises that if that is reality, what exactly has the CISO, whoever done to manage this kind of stuff? The answer really is people do not have very clearly defined thing, and this is what we call the shadow AI risk actually. So something for boards to kind of think about. The other area of which, from an AI risk perspective, we're seeing and we worried a lot is around infringement of copyright. Data privacy related considerations. Many of them were not designed. Now today there are frameworks which are available to manage this AI risk, but are boards familiar with what those frameworks are, and are they in fact challenging management to see where management is as compared to that framework? The final thing I'll say on AI is again a technical issue, but since we're talking about it, I might as well put it down. A lot of companies are kind of using the LLMs and then building on top of the LLMs on their own models based on their industry, their use case, etc. Each of this development is throwing up a new type of risk actually. And so just think of it like you have a process to managing tech development risk. There is some similar framework required for managing AI development risk. Now I'm not for a minute suggesting that boards should kind of do all of this. All I'm saying is boards should ask these questions, and boards should know what questions to ask, and that's really where conversations will kind of start. So it's amazing stuff kind of happening out there. I'll tell everybody, general counsels, I think everybody needs. This is not somebody else's problem. This is not the CFO's problem, the CTO's problem, the CISO's problem. This honestly will end up being a big legal mess at some point in time, and therefore this group needs to be very clear in terms of how they are managing and dealing with this. So Abhishek, back to you.
Thanks, Jamil. I think very, very relevant. It is a changing landscape and we need to adopt quickly. I am conscious of time. Nitin, I want to come to you on an ESG related question, and post that we'll flip to some audience questions. Nitin, for you, how can companies distinguish genuine ESG initiatives from greenwashing and demonstrate credibility?
Abhishek, this is an interesting time to be discussing this. In many ways, over the last few years, around the world, all of us thought we'd made some good progress on this. Whether it was on climate or on diversity. Yeah, but considering what's happening in the US at the moment, it genuinely has taken a little bit of I would say, a setback in that context. Now, one of the challenges with this was that are these goals just for sake of goals, and how do they align to company strategy? I think that was one part of it. It was fashionable to be saying this is what you do and this is what it means, and because everyone else was doing it, you needed to move in that direction. Yeah. Obviously, I'm not saying most or all did that stuff, but there was a lot of that in general direction that was happening. And the second part is it only about the US? What about rest of the world? So in general, what have we seen? We do a lot of work around some elements of this, which is especially on the DEI thing, dedicated group around the world that does help companies with DEI charters, mandates, consulting, etc., and those things. So I think there is a US and a non-US view to this. As much as companies in US, some because of the belief and some because system has forced them, have now taken a backseat, and many across Europe, many in Asia are now kind of going to say, hey, when we revisit this, we want to be much ahead of what some of the Western companies are to be able to have evolved our practices and programs in this context. So what are companies doing? I think one part of it is to we've seen a lot of ESG education at board level to say what does it really mean. I think it's one thing to say, hey, what climate is, and is it 1 degree, 1.5 degree, and what this change really means, but how does that actually influence your own company? When the boards and senior leaders understand this, their ability to genuinely say what this means is one thing. I think the other thing that we've seen is it becoming an important enough metric linked to CEO pay in an organization. Yeah, and I would go back to the point that Arpinder said earlier on compliance. Where was you could do whatever you do to deliver results, but in compliance, if you are not out there, it's a 0-1 in that context. Why should anything? I think we've seen some really some companies around the world actually do a 0-1 on ESG. You could deliver whatever you did, but if you haven't delivered the ESG mandate, yeah, there is no incentive pay or whatever kind of equity plans you have. They get pushed out by a year, 2 years, or for that year don't quite happen. I think we've seen a bunch of that kind of stuff happen. Now, the other thing to this is, so that's one part of program and practices that we've seen. The other is to say, hey, let's not broad brush ESG and say in our context, what's the important thing to do? So if here and now diversity is the more important thing, let's focus on that for next 1 or 2 years and say, let's build that element up in terms of what do we do. So I think those are 2 things that we're seeing. One is if you really wanted to matter, link pay to it. We've always seen when pay and incentives align, a lot of other things get delivered. So we're seeing direction in that place. The other thing, like I said, for metrics that are important, I would say in addition to compliance, if you think ESG is important, it's a 0-1 game in that context. And we've seen some companies across the world where over the last couple of years, irrespective of performance, equity did not mature, incentives did not get paid out, and things like that.
Oh, thank you, Nitin. So that's actually very helpful and completely aligned with what we are sort of seeing on ground as well. With that, Nitin, Arpinder, Jamil, thank you so much. We will close the formal sort of questions that we have posed to you and now open to the audience for their questions. I know we've already got a few in line. As they sort of pop up, I'm going to bring them on. The first one, Arpinder, I'll pose to you because this is linked to something that you spoke of very passionately, I must say. How would boards engage constructively with activist shareholders while protecting company interests?
So that's a very, very important part today, and I think Jamil had attributed to proxy advisors, for instance. I would say I'll take two parts again. I'll break it into two parts. One is you have proxy advisors, etc., and then you have these things called short sellers. We saw a lot of short sellers in India in the last 3 years. I would put them also in this activist group. Now, short sellers are interesting. They make money on the side, right? I mean, and they disclose it. They say we are taking a position in a company and we're going to become activists on this. I would say first lesson learned, because I've done a lot of short seller investigations, I think is not to ignore when a short seller starts engaging with you or an activist starts engaging with you. The worst you can do is go to sleep and hope he or she disappears. That's not going to happen. So that's number one. Don't ignore. Immediately get a team together which has legal, compliance, business together so that you can start taking this seriously and responding to the activist shareholder or a short seller in a proactive manner. Super critical. I've seen many companies fail, and then the activist shareholder or the even the short seller says, "I gave the company enough opportunity. They didn't respond. They didn't clarify my queries, etc." So I think that's very, very important. Second is also understanding the intent of the activist shareholder and short seller is also something which a company should do, because that will help them create their strategy on how to deal with it. Because it is a person. A person could be bringing right issues to the surface, or a person could be making malicious issues to the surface, right? So you have to be clear what their agenda is, okay? Because that builds into your strategy and how to deal with it. And I feel, again, companies sometimes don't do that enough. You need to understand the mindset of the person you're dealing with. And I would say last is keep in mind that you don't violate any laws while dealing with that activist shareholder, for instance, in UPSI, etc. Because today, UPSI laws, we're doing so many investigations around insider trading where UPSI models have been broken. Things are not flagged off. You have Teams chats where information is put in and shared, or you meet an activist shareholder in a coffee shop, but the activist shareholder records your conversation. So I think people should understand that everything you say or do will be recorded. So you cannot have a side conversation, violate all UPSI rules, tell the active shareholder something which will make him or her happy and resolve your issue in the short term, because it will lead to further problems, because these people are going to spread the news. You will have a violation, some people will come down your nose. So it's not easy, but you have to balance things out. You have to comply with the law and at the same time deal with them proactively would be my advice.
Thank you. Thank you, Arpinder. The next one I want to pose to you, Jamil. What governance structure should be prioritized as startups transition to late stage growth or IPO?
Yeah. So this is again no easy answers here. I'll call out things which we are seeing and what we're not seeing. Unfortunately, like all markets, India is seeing a lot of companies that grow, become decacorns, plus, and suddenly you realize your systems processes are not up to the mark. I think I'll say 3 or 4 things. I think first of all is has the company in a timely manner invested in their finance organization? The number of big companies where we still see CFOs not being in place, high quality CFO not being in place, I think that's kind of a problem that has to be dealt with. Similarly, with the audit system, chief internal auditors, all of that. So I think the one important thing would be, is the company making the right investment, the right talent, and the right people as they kind of move away from being a very high growth company into a high growth, but a more kind of a publicly accountable company. The second part of that, really, the investment in the systems within the company. So the number of big companies we see, private companies that still struggle with their closing, getting audits completed, getting finance completed, business finance is coming from 300 different systems. MIS is not tying to this thing. We recently involved in a situation where after a whistleblower fraud, etc. was found, and the basic thing was they had 9 different IT systems which are running 9 parallel books, and many of this could have been dealt with if there were proper reconciliations between what your MIS kind of systems are and what the automation within whatever your ERP is, right? So I think the investments in your technology and your systems and processes is very important. Policies and procedures, both on giving people guidance on what controls have to be exercised, how related parties should work, should not work. So I think the whole gamut of getting the right investments in the back end, even at the business scales up at the front end, is very important. I call that upliftment of the entire finance and risk organization within a company. So that's kind of one big theme. Two other themes I'll kind of call out is the getting independent directors on the board. I joke about this. A lot of my private equity friends ask me, when should we get Unicus in to help a company to become a public company? And the way I answered it is to say, if you were in the US, I actually get in 18 months before, prepare a company for 18 months, and then we become a public company. In India, we first become a public company, then prepare for 18 months after that. And I think that's really the irony, where we get independent directors when the DRHP has to be filed and all of that stuff. So getting in the right directors, independent directors, 12, 15 months before, super critical in terms of how that's kind of got to be done. And the final point I'll make actually is on culture. See, you can do all of this, but unless the founder and the founding team understand that you are no longer just chasing growth for the sake of growth, but you're working within a system, will that system sometimes constrain your ability to be innovative? Of course, but that's the trade-off between being a publicly listed company and being a closely held company. If you feel so passionately about it, then you perhaps are not ready to be a public company, and that's maybe the right answer for your company. But if you want to go public, you need to kind of institutionalize some things around risk controls, and like I said, a big culture change is kind of really important. So yeah, that would be my kind of take on that.
Thank you, Jamil. In fact, since you've spoken of culture change and a culture difference, let me bring in the next question. And Nitin, we'd be grateful for your inputs on this. What lessons can the private sector learn from governance reforms in the PSU sector, and vice versa, if you think one is better than the other, and what sort of they can take away from each other?
And before I come to that, I thought the previous one was a fascinating question. And to Jamil's point, there's a host of companies that will go public in India over the next couple of years. Many investors are looking for exits in that context. I think, to the last point Jamil mentioned, the most important, because companies and founders have to realize that the biggest change is the mindset change that actually happens. The fact that they are open to scrutiny, and anyone can ask them a few things, and they have to genuinely answer that question, in a manner that actually satisfies, is a big thing. So we've seen a couple of other things. We're currently doing 4 or 5 of these engagements where we are working. I like the point on independent directors. One of the practices that we've seen with one of those currently in the process, a Bangalore-based company, is the founder steps out of a board meeting and lets the meeting happen without him for a few hours, and to say how was first half of the day or first couple of hours, and what would they have done if he was not in the room to decide things differently, and then comes back again later, closes the meeting in that context. Then they, we also realized over a period of time that one of the big changes, as part of mindset, is it's easy to say that tomorrow morning 9 a.m. I'm going to be different because I'm suddenly a listed firm, and I would. But individually, what does it need to kind of get going with psychometric testing? To say this is how I show up usually. These are blind spots for me. This is how I would respond, not respond in a particular situation, and then not only put the CEO, but 10, 15, 12, 15 senior leaders in that context through a process to say how they would, because they need to engage with now the board and many of the other things. To the point, I think CFO, etc., and some of those things. So we've seen a bunch of those, and I would think it's an interesting space to watch out for. We've seen some not so good stories with venture-backed companies. Some of them could have been pretty close to IPO in that context, or investors realizing money, but significant dilution. So I think it's a big thing to solve for. And like as a country, I think we need to get through very high quality successful IPOs over the next few. Otherwise, India's image gets dented over a period of time of what's really happening with capital in that context. Now, on your point on PSU, honestly, we don't work enough with them, so I don't have. But one thing that we've constantly seen is, I think, degree of transparency. There's more available that others could look at. people also talk of succession, but I'm actually honestly not too sure because succession is some bits not necessarily driven by the board, the company. It's driven by many other factors that come into play. But I would say there are enough and more examples of Abhishek in the non-PSU space in India where stuff has really happened over a period of time. Promoter families to professionally held. We've spoken about those Murugappas many years back. Godrej in that context, you can yeah, or where companies have merged and have delivered value. Some of the banks. So I would say there's enough. I would say there's some things to learn. I would compare a bit between PSUs and others, but I would say the operating environments are so different that sometimes enough lessons can't be taken from X to Y. I think private companies need to in their own context build out what's the right thing to do and what's the good thing to do, and sometimes do much more than what the market actually demands as bare minimum standards. But maybe Arpinder and Jameel have a point of view that could be more relevant on this one.
I would actually love to comment for 1 minute. I know Abhishek is running against time, but I'll take only 20 seconds on this, Abhishek, if you give me. Nitin, fully agree. But just to add on public sector and government, I'll put it in bucket. Everyone has a perception that private sector's got more money. They focus on it more. I actually have a slightly new and refreshed opinion in the last 2 years. It's working a lot with the government sector. If you look at the Ministry of Education, different ministries, Ministry of Health, the way they've embraced technology and governance and compliance, I think is far better than the private sector. They've used AI. I mean, if you take examinations taking part all across India today, you can run 10,000 test centers using CCTV analytics, OCR, this capability, open source. I mean, I swear to God, I have never seen so much technology and usage of it in the private sector as I see today in the government. They've got a little bit more freedom. They do a lot of open source, while private sector is a bit bundled into doing their own within their environment, etc. But I have been super impressed in the last 2 years the way the government and PSUs have embraced compliance and technology. I think they're kind of racing a bit ahead of the private sector today, in my view. Number two is, I would say, so the private sector can learn a lot from actually the public sector and government today, because I think their technology is actually a little bit more advanced today because of the amount they have invested in it. So just thought I'll add that.
Yeah, no, and Arpinder, I want to hold you back for the next question, which I think has come from the in-house team directly, because it's something which is very relevant. We see this in our deals as well. What governance protections should in-house counsels insist on when negotiating joint ventures?
So I would say the biggest issue I see in joint ventures, to be honest, Abhishek, which you have to adjust in your contracts for, is disputes. When you have a deadlock, how do you deal with that issue? So I would say the biggest clause is a deadlock clause. What do you do with that? One is obviously arbitration. It could be mediation. How do you draft those clauses? How do you draft potentially getting a mediation person and identifying that person? How is the arbitration clauses drafted? Because that's the worst case scenario, right? I mean, joint ventures where you end up in actual dispute where the two parties don't talk to each other, business is curtailed, etc. So I would say that is one thing I would say from a governance protection is very important. Second, I would say is unanimous consent. So who has to give consent on what matters? That should be really listed down, in the sense of, is it a joint consent? How many votes do you need? Who will decide what in a committee? How many committees will be set up? So I think it must be decided very clearly how the company will be run in a joint venture scenario. I've seen situations where the CFO is appointed by one party, the CEO is appointed by one party. It leads to some chaos at some point of time in the organization. So being clear about who's running what is important. Third is exit rights, right? I mean, I was doing a lot of work with a liquor company, which had a joint venture in India. And I mean, it was just crazy because, I mean, how can you get out? There was no exit clause or proper exit clause in the contract. Again, very legal, but I think that has to be looked at so that, and especially for foreign parties, I think Nitin's point is very valid. Some of the international companies struggle with their joint ventures in India. Some of them came in 10 years back, they entered into joint ventures, the FDI rules changed, now they can get 100%, but they don't know how to break out of their joint venture contracts. Sometimes the joint venture party is not that cooperative in that sense. So exit rights, if rules change, if regulation change, if you really want to come into India alone, also protection on intellectual property is super important. I mean, I see so many cases where multinationals are not bidding for government contracts because they don't want to register their product. They have IP issues. So it's very sad actually. India doesn't get the best technology because most global companies don't want to share their IP in India because they're not confident that their IP will be protected. So again, looking at intellectual property in a joint venture contract, who owns the brand, who owns the product, who owns this, being very clear about this. And lastly, information sharing clauses. That means being very clear about how information will be shared with any one of the two parties. Let's say there's a feeling that I've been robbed or someone has siphoned money. That's another common thing. He took the money, I took the money. So having information sharing clauses and a mediator of an auditor who will come in. And I've seen a lot of people put in a clause now that we'll get this Big Four in. Actually, they specify the name because it leads to a dispute on which firm also. So suddenly they have EY, KPMG, PwC, Deloitte, and they're fighting which firm they want to get in. So actually, good lawyer will actually say, this is the name of the firm. We're not going to debate it afterwards. This one will come in, do the investigation and tell us if everything was right from a corporate governance perspective. So I can continue, but I think joint venture contracts, really, you have to have the best lawyers who really can protect both sides.
Yeah, no, thank you, Arpinder. The last question that I have is, I feel one of the biggest real world problems that we face. I will pose this to all three of you, and I would like all three of your insights because I'm sure that will be really valuable for our audience today. The question is, how can boards ensure real independence when promoters still exercise de facto control of companies today? And maybe to start, Jamil, if you would like to start off, and then I would invite the other panelists as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I think first, as you correctly said, Abhishek, this is a real life kind of problem, and I'll maybe layer it, put up a few points of reference, and Arpinder, Nitin can please add. I think first of all, this is a big question for the board to ask whether they want to be on the board or not. See, there are some promoters where they will never be controlled actually. So I call it the association risk problem. I tell all my friends again who want to become independent directors on some company's board that please be clear what you're getting into. To get into a company expecting the promoter not to kind of control, it's a wrong decision on your part. So I call this the association risk question, and that's reality. Which is why some boards will get some type of people while others will not. I think that's one part. The second part is assuming that the founder promoter does want to make a change, or that's a board that one wants to be associated with, is to set the tone very clearly at the beginning. See, I think on some of this, what really matters is what is your going in position. If you're a board member, an independent director, and you lay down what your expectations, etc., are, I think chances are you'll be able to do that much better than suddenly waking up and saying, I assume this is not happening. You knew this was a promoter controlled company. So setting down the expectations, I think, is a second layer worth thinking about. I think the third layer is the composition of the board itself, which means who all are there on the board. How can you compose the board in a way where there isn't just one person trying to kind of hold the independence flag. It never works. But you actually have people who are willing and want to run it as an independently kind of governed and run board. So how the composition kind of becomes important. We have seen some very nice practices around independent directors meeting without the management. You mentioned the point about the founder situation, but just generally, how do independent directors come together, not to in some way gang up against the founder, but make sure that they are aligned in terms of what is being sought to be achieved from a governance perspective. I think that would be another kind of important element. I think the good news is I have seen this happen in real world. Actually, I've been very fortunate as an auditor for some of the largest companies in the country that you've seen where promoter interest, not just de facto, but even where promoters have real controlling interest, a majority, the way the board has conducted itself and the way the chair of the audit committee, the lead independent director have conducted themselves have resulted in a good outcome. Of course, that gets gets into hairy situation at that time. But then I have seen other boards where effectively, even without de facto control but a dominant founder, you end up the board just kind of putting its hands up and not getting the independence that on paper they're supposed to have. So that's the framework within which I have seen it operate, and I would pass it on to Arpinder Nitin.
Nitin, you want
So, I wouldn't say more than what Jamil said. I would say, firstly, like Vinod said, I think in India, in an environment where, you have big promoters, extraordinary vision, some of them are setting up new, it's not an easy environment to be in. There's also interest in many to be independent directors. My view on that is it's not an easy job, and you need to be a little patient with it. Stuff doesn't change day one. To Jamil's point, at the time, ask those questions early on. Why me? What's in it, and those things. Couple of things that we've seen, to ask for independent outside effectiveness surveys and to have combined and unique presentations to the chair and to each of the subcommittees. That's one. We've also seen examples of asking for some of them to have a coach or a mentor to the chair who can from the outside engage with them. So we've seen some of those ones. But the most important thing is you have to get in knowing what some of those pains, challenges could be. That's one. And I think patience is a big thing, because you either come in because strategy interests you or a company interests you, and then you have to just build some muscle around patience on this one.
I think my view is similar to the Jamil and Nitin. I'd just like to add one thing. I don't think companies today in India have a choice. I think their corporate governance at the board level has to increase for three reasons. One is private equity. Private equity 10 years back was nice to do. Fancy people all from Harvard, Wharton, great to hang out. They had a lot more money than us. But the fact is today private equity is very omnipresent. I think it's present in large companies, it's present in mid-cap companies, small companies. They will not allow you to have a board which is fully influenced by a founder. I've at least never seen that happen. And I would say today PEs are far more engaged, and they will definitely make sure corporate governance for them is super critical in that sense, because you have LP, GP structures. LPs will not tolerate any bad behavior, whether it's ESG, corporate governance, or any other issue. So that's one. Second is most other companies which don't get private equity money have joint ventures, as you asked earlier. So again, the joint venture partner, if that is outside India or from any other company, they will ensure there's some level of governance and this pull and push in that sense. I would say third bit is the auditor. The auditor is afraid to go to jail. So the fact is, you can be rest assured the auditor will bring issues to the surface today, and we are far more, candid than maybe. To be fair, we are all auditors, and I have to say, in the last 10 years, an auditor has become much more omnipresent and aggressive in their viewpoint. And lastly, my feeling is the second generation. The second generation is educated outside India more often than not. They are less tolerant. They've already got money in the bank. They want to do things the right way. They're not okay with shortcuts. They want to build for the long run. They believe a lot in what Jamil said right at the beginning, advisors. So it's about, you always don't have the right answer. Some wise man once told me, just hire the right people and you will do much better. So I think considering all of this, I think if there's still boards which are not fully independent, I think they will have change in the next year or two, because the world is not going to tolerate it.
Well, thank you for those insights. I have 3.5 pages of notes which I have scribbled copiously, only to say that these are all new things I've learned, and this is a field I work in. So I'm really grateful. I will try to quickly summarize maybe 4 key takeaways. I cannot say it better than all of you have, but I will try to do a 30-second overview of this. The world has changed. I think today we live in a world where governance is perhaps more important than it ever was before. There is a very high digital footprint. You have high accountability on auditors. You have an active regulator. So the seriousness ascribed to governance is higher than ever before. Crisis is inevitable, as we discussed today, a line I'm going to save for future reference. It is important to have open communication, get the right advisors in place at the right time, right training for the board, for the advisors to try and prevent crisis. But of course, when it comes, you need to be better prepared. A large part of the KPIs, including compliance and governance, that is an increasing trend we are seeing, not just growth and company performance. That helps with a more balanced organization for a more long-term view rather than short-term growth. And finally, of course, the role of AI. This is an evolving category, and we tend to see a bigger role that AI will play as time goes on. With that, I would like to thank all of you on the panel today. So thank you everyone who participated in the poll. Finally, I would like to thank all the panel members for sharing their expertise and experience with us today. You were simply outstanding. I don't know what else to say. This, I expected a certain degree of finesse, of expertise coming out. This has far surpassed what I was expecting. So I can only say thank you. I am smarter because of you today. A lot for me to go back and read on, and I'm sure the same will be for our audience as well. Thank you also to our audience for your attention and questions. I hope you found the webinar interesting and a worthwhile investment of your time. We certainly enjoyed bringing it to you. After the webinar, we will send you a copy of today's presentation material, summary notes, and of course, a link to the webinar recording. You will also separately receive a request for your feedback on some other aspects of the webinar. We'd be grateful if you could give us feedback there as well. Again, promise it's not more than 1 minute. If you are, of course, interested in in-house training or any other matters arising from this webinar, do not hesitate to reach out to us. You also have credentials of all our panelists. You would, of course, be encouraged to reach out to them as you would want to. On that note, thank you so much for your time and your attention.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Happy Diwali to everyone.
Happy Diwali.